I forgot to make you the host.
Thank you.
So last year's user conference, we had our first KPI summit. We have two summits at the user conference. One is the SV score, right, where we go through all the different scoring parameters, review, what parameters we want to be looking at, what the variant, what the thresholds are. And what I mean by that is, let's take, high float value, right? So that's a parameter. The thresholds would be, well, what do we consider high float value? And then we have the third component, which is the weight, right? Which is how important is that in the score, or how many points is that worth? So we do that for the SV score every year. And last year we initiated a new one, which is the KPI score. And we had our first summit. The participants in that summit came up with, here is the KPI, the same thing. Here are the items. Oh, let me get some more people coming in. Todd, let me make you,
Please.
yeah. So you can help me keep an eye on that. Give me just a second here. Find you, there you go. But anyway, so last year we determined what we had already had. Let me back up a little bit further. We had already had through the user summits, we had already had preliminary, I guess we'd call preliminary KPI summits, where we said, and let me pull it up in Schedule Validator, just so, let me share my screen, right? So share here. Yeah, so what we had previously had, discussions in part of our SV summits about, when I upload a schedule, what are the main things that I want to see right here? We had obviously schedule quality. We had these three progress assessments, and then the change score, where it had been determined over a period of time that these are the main things that we want to see. And so that's kind of how this dashboard's been built. We came back later and added another column for the contract variance, right? When we added the feature where you can add the contract. And so now you have these KPI scores that, in the user's review, it's like, these are the main things I want to see. But last year we actually got into another detail on what, of these components right here, what are the most important things? These are parameters again. What is a good score? What's a bad score? And what should their value be? So basically we took our first stab at setting up these as the parameters like we have on the SV score. And then what are the thresholds for these? And then the points. So we ended up with, this is our KPI, our first implementation, right? So we have, here are the parameters, right, that we're looking at. This is just some descriptions. If I scroll to the right here, this is what I put together from last year's meeting. So here are the thresholds, a good score, a bad score, or, the different thresholds, and then the weighted values, right? So we are implementing that, and then so in the next few days, let's see, where do I have that? Oh, it's here. In the next few days, you'll be seeing another column there, you'll have the SVI score and the SV score and the KPI score, or the project score. You'll see this right here, and you'll have this. This is what we're looking at doing. So this is kind of an overall project score. I'm actually debating on with the guys on just keeping the current score up here and maybe not putting it in here. But the reason I'm bringing that to your attention, we're going to try to release that here in the next week. And we want to be able to get feedback and start really fine tuning that and preparing for the summit this year at the user conference and have enough feedback, even if you can't go to the conference, to be able to get some feedback prior to the conference. So when we come back from the conference, we can, update this spreadsheet with the, what comes out of the panel and really start to finalize a good project score. So that's kind of what I'd like to just go through that and see if there's any feedback or any thoughts on any of that.
That's great. Yeah, a couple comments in the chat here said that would be a good addition to that. One comment suggesting here, I'm getting pushback from my colleagues that the SV scoring metric is not making sense. And so, again, looking at kind of how we can perhaps incorporate more data to show how that project is faring overall.
Yeah, anybody, you can feel free to speak up if you got thoughts on that or any questions on that.
John, what's the timing of that? When do you think this will be released and we'll be able to start testing it?
In the next few days. That's why I wanted to bring it up today.
Okay.
It'll hopefully be up before our next meeting. And so you can just kind of start looking at it. Probably what we'll do, we have the ability to do what we call a limited release. So if you'd like to be on that list, we'll do a preliminary release and get some initial feedback, and then we'll release it to everyone probably a week later. Just so we know it's working, we know the calculations are correct, whatever.
Okay.
And then just get some general feedback, and we'll start getting that ready to, for the summit. That's the primary thing, is that we want to have people take time to review it and have an opportunity to get the feedback and prepare for the summit. So that's kind of the time frame on it.
Okay.
And the idea here is, that once again, it's kind of like the schedule quality. The whole point, these are they're called key performance indicators, KPIs. These are indicators only. I had a conversation with one of the users the other day, and they were asking about this particular, I think they were asking about compression and how it's calculated and what happens in this scenario. How does it impact compression? And I'm like, there's different things that can happen that may have a negative impact on your score on compression, for example. But you can't account necessarily for everything in things like this. But the idea is that it's an indicator, right? And this is just something that's saying, hey, you probably ought to look and see what's going on here. So it's the same thing with this project score. We're just looking for ways to make it easier for, number one, easier for the schedulers to say, hey, if I would do this, my project score would get better. Or if I would make these changes, my SV score would be better, right? Try to make it simple for users to, this will come with another narrative like the SV score does that says, hey, if you'll fix, your SV score, you'll improve your points by this much. Or if you'll, start improving your execution score, kind of a thing. So that's the goal of these, is to help people in, it's like the SV score, it's to help give our end users, our schedulers, an easy tool to improve the reliability of their critical path. That's the whole purpose of the SV score. But it also makes it, on the second part of that, it makes it easy for me as a manager or someone who's reviewing things to just give a quick indication that, this schedule, or in this case, this project, based on the latest update, needs attention, right? Needs attention. And it may be you get a bad score, maybe you had a bad month where you had delays that came up and pushed everything out, and you had this problem and that problem. So your score wasn't good, even though you did everything right. But it's just an indicator that this project may need attention, right? So that's the purpose of this score is, how can I make it easy for the end user to know and learn how to improve their scheduling skills primarily, because most of this is schedule related, but also make it very easy for managers and executives just to have a clear indicator that this project needs attention or whatever.
So John, I got a question. So the schedule value score, I mean, everything's based off of logic, float, quality of schedule, right?
Right.
The KPI, that's more having to do so with your updates. Is that, you're setting milestones throughout the project, right? And tracking to see how that schedule goes. So what is the KPI measuring against? Sorry, I hopped on a little late, but
No problem.
did you go over what that measures?
Yeah,
exactly?
so let me go here. Right, so it's like the SV score, right? And the SV score, I got a 75 on this schedule, and I can see here, hey, if I'll fix this, my SV score gets better, right? If I fix this, I can get these points, right? So the idea here on the SV score is just to make it easy for a scheduler. The 2 points, I make it easier for a scheduler to go in and improve their score, and then it makes it much easier for a manager to recognize, hey, this schedule needs attention, right?
Yep.
So how the KPI score came about is, hey, you can have a great schedule quality, right? But if they're not execution, because I can technically go in and make sure everything's tied in, right? For example,
Yep.
so everything's tied in, but it may not be tied in correctly, right? So that's the purpose of what we call the progress scores that look at it and say, hey, yeah, you've got a good score here, but because of these other KPIs, this project needs attention, right? From an overall more of a project schedule, not just the schedule, but from a project, which is a reflection of the schedule, right?
Yep.
That, a 40, in this case that I'm looking at here, a 40 execution score really means that even though the schedule didn't get such a bad score, they're not really following the schedule, basically, is what that's saying. So the purpose of this KPI score, and we decided to do the scoring component last year was our first attempt, and this is what we're getting ready to implement, is to say, let's take all of these KPIs right here into take all of these into account and come up with a way that we can say, hey, based on all of this, you get an overall project score. So if you came in late, we have this came out of our summit last year, where here's all the KPIs that we're measuring, right? And then here are we came up with, and once again, this came out of last year, and we're going to implement it, so we have time to really fine tune it this year. So these are good score, bad score, and here's the points associated with those. So that's kind of how, the idea is now we'll have an overall project score to show here with a very similar report that says, hey, the reason you're not getting a good score is because you're not executing well. Right?
Okay. that's
You've got a good
nice.
schedule score, but if you're not executing what's in your schedule, your overall project score is going to be negatively impacted. So once again, it's just one of those things that we can see. Is that, as a scheduler, here's something I can do to improve my project score, right? Which are just good learning tools. And then from a management standpoint, it gives us the ability to really, identify. It's an indicator that, this project could use some improvement or whatever.
Gotcha. Okay. And is that column replacing the contract variance column?
No, this is just a mock. This is
Oh,
something I
okay.
just put up here. This is something that one of the guys, they were asking me today. They were saying, "Hey, is this how you want it to display?" So I just threw it up here so you guys
Oh,
can.
okay.
But
I was going to say, I like the contract.
oh no, the
variance.
contract score is going to be there. In fact, this is probably not going to be there. We're probably going to keep it real simple.
Okay.
Because the reason being, we're one of the challenges, just FYI, what we got into is if I have a, I'm doing really, really good. I've got really good execution scores, but all of a sudden I have a bad week, right? Or a bad month, right? Where we had delays or whatever, and our execution score dropped in our score. Well, I don't want to say, hey, this project has a bad score necessarily because they just had one period that wasn't good. But if I'm a manager, I want to see that. Hey, we had a period that was really bad, right? So one of the things that we'll be working through in the summit this year is right now we're just throwing in, we're going to take this period is going to be heavily weighted compared to the average of the project. So if a project's been going really, really good, that's taken into account, even though you have this one bad month, right? If it's one bad month in the past, then it's all part of the average, and it won't be a big indicator. But if you have a bad month this month, it's going to be weighted more than the average so far. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So that'll be one of the things that we'll look at some more, and we'll look at some more into, at the summit and say, hey, I think the current score, because you need to know if you had a bad month, right? But at the same time, I don't want to have look like the project's falling apart just because we had some delays this month, but I want to know it, you know what I mean?
Right.
So those are the kind of things that we'll be working through at the summit.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You bet.
Jason, there's one other tidbit here is that one of the other reasons we're doing this is that, as you'll see at the user conference, we have a lot of focus on the predictability modeling. And so this becomes kind of a linchpin for the predictability modeling as you look in historical to see, how did your, civil projects do overall? How did your industrial projects do? How did those, whatever, roads do, whatever type of project you're working on, and have kind of a foundational measurement of those projects in the portfolio and look back historically at them and be able to predict, where you're going in the future. So, it's an evolution, not revolution, but it's definitely going to, change the way we look at this data. And you'll see a lot about that from Dr. Simone in his presentation on that Wednesday morning. So,
Okay.
the other thing that just I heard a lot about at the recent conference, and as I talk to customers, we talk about this often, just found, how do you start to incorporate kind of the overall, general conditions, the burn rate, what are your liquid damages? How do you start incorporating that into the dashboard, make it presentable to your executive team, but maybe not everybody in the organization, or maybe decide to present to everybody. But those items are also forthcoming so that you can really understand, in your role responsibility, how do you start making impact into the company on those items. So
Perfect. Thank you.
yeah. And we're always open to good ideas from others, so please feel free to send them our way. John, there was one other question, slightly different from the theme of today, but really just a quick view of a comparison between baseline and any current schedule around critical path and finish slip. Would you mind just showing us that real fast?
While I'm doing that, can you repeat exactly?
Sure.
I'm sure I understand the
Just,
question correctly.
Yeah, just a view of a comparison view between baseline and any other schedule or the current schedule maybe.
Okay. Well, here is this was a feature. This is a recent act. I know we've covered this before in our in some of our previous, but if you hadn't been here, this is a really nice feature where you can go in and designate a project as a baseline, right? So because you may submit and I may get to this point in the project and we get a change order extending the contract date. So I want to make this one the new designated baseline, right? So over here in the right, I can undesignate it, or if it's not designated, I can make this the baseline. Really, it doesn't do a whole lot as far as the what you're looking at on the dashboard. Really the value of that is, and this was user input, which I recognize as a big one, is when I'm doing a schedule narrative, for example, for a project, almost always one of the first things you have is a table of my milestones that shows here's the baseline date, here's my last month's date, and here's this month's date, right? So we added this feature so you could do that easily, right? So for example, here if I want to run my milestone report, this is exactly what I would have in my narrative for this month. As soon as I upload this schedule, I get it done, I'm ready to do the narrative. I want to compare my milestones from this month to last month and to the baseline. So now I have the ability to compare milestones. And you can see here's my TCO milestone. Here it is in my baseline. Here it is last month, and here it is this month. And there's my variance from last month from B to A, and my variance from B to the baseline. So that's really the main thing that baseline does. And there's some other reports that will be adding, some of the trends reports, right? There's going to be a new early start, late start trend, that kind of shows you, float, compression or whatever, but we'll be able to we'll be adding that baseline feature to some of the reporting as well, similar to that milestone chart. So that's really the main thing about that baseline. It doesn't do anything to any of the calculations on this page, other than it adds it gives you the ability to say, add these, add the dates from this column or from this schedule, to these reports as we add that to more and more reports. Does that make sense?
You wanted to add on top of that question with another one maybe here, Tony?
Hi, yeah, sorry, I can't find the raised hand. I'm a Teams user. I couldn't figure that one out. John, I think what would be really good, maybe what we were looking for more, is on the project summary page, back a level. There, it seems to compare everything to the previous update for those summaries. And it would be really great if you could have a column that says, okay, this is your finished slip from the previous update, but this is your finished slip from the baseline.
Oh, a baseline slip. Oh.
Just a
Tony, if
suggestion
you keep
there.
adding too many good ideas, we're going to have to figure something out here.
You got to give Nelson credit for that one. He's the one looking for that, right?
Oh, that's a great idea, actually. And that would be an easy one to do. Yeah, that's a good one. Of course, then next time somebody's going to want to have the baseline execution as well. That's actually.
I personally am struggling with the baseline part because we are not, yeah. If we get added days, do we have to create a whole new schedule? Which one is the baseline? It is so.
Well, here's how this
consistent
works.
throughout all of our
Compare it to the
our
baseline.
schedules that would be a hard one for us.
Yeah, let me show you how that works. And at least in my experience, right? So here's a good example. If I go into the contracts, right? where here's my original contract dates, right? Well, and this is an older schedule, but in January 15 of 2021, I got a change order that extended the contract completion date, right? So you can see here you can see it right here where my contract date was extended, right? In fact, my finish date didn't move, but the owner gave us, probably a delay that occurred way back here. They finally gave us the change order, right? So you can see here, this is the schedule, the first schedule after that contract date. So what I would do, and what typically happens in this situation, sorry about that, I'm missing my buttons, but this would become, once I get a change order, that becomes my new baseline, right? So I would do this number, and now that's my new baseline that I'm measuring against, because that schedule started a new, that has the new contract dates in it.
And again, we get change orders that don't match up to any of our schedules. They are so
That's
far
correct,
behind
but
issuing them.
Right. So I would only, the term you'll hear most often is they'll call it a re-baseline, right? Or a revised baseline. And so typically, because, you don't always do this, but in a lot of schedules, you go into your schedule, you put a constraint on the substantial completion that's linked to the contract date, right? And so you can't just arbitrarily change what your contractual completion date is until you get a change order. But once you get a change order, you'll typically go into your schedule and change that constraint date to reflect, I still may be behind on it or whatever, but now my float, either negative or positive, is being measured against my new contract date. So this baseline, every time you get a change order that changes the contract completion, in theory, that's a new baseline, right? So that's what you're doing. So if I do this report, if I'm doing the compare baseline or the milestones, this is going to show me now, this is a new date, right? This is my new date that I put in my change order. And now in this case, it didn't move, but my contract completion date is based on this new baseline. So I only move this. I only switch baselines when I get a change order. Because now with that change order, I have a new completion date. And so that becomes the schedule that I'm measuring against going forward, because it's based on the contract. And that's typically the industry practice. Right, there's some,
John?
Yes.
Yeah, are you saying then if you re-baseline, so you have changed that to the 1/18/21 data date baseline, should your finish slip then change also, the total finish slip at the top?
No.
Should that measure to the
No, because
baseline?
this one is looking at there's two different things I'm looking at.
Right.
What happened to my end date, right? That's my finish slip, right? But what happened to my, where am I in comparison to the contract date? That's two different things, right?
Right, but when you re-baseline, and maybe this isn't an always thing, but you are taking that finish slip and the contract variance, they should equal each other out, right? And I would want to know where I'm slipping beyond that new contract date that is established.
Well, it's still showing you this, right? So for example, you can see right here, my last couple of schedules, I fell behind. I lost 7 days and another 3 days, but I'm still, in fact, I had gained 3 days, right? And then gained another 7 days. And then I lost, so I was 12 days. And then I lost time, but I'm still 12, even though I slipped a little bit, I'm still ahead of my contract variance, right? I'm still 12 days ahead of my contract time, even though I slipped. So this is an unusual, what typically happens, right? In in a schedule.
Usually go the other
You,
way.
you have a contract date. You have a contract date that's set, right? So you'll start showing, you may show yourself behind the contract date. You had a finished slip and now you're behind the contract date, but then you kind of start maintaining that date, but you're still behind the contract date until you get up here somewhere and they give you a change order and now they catch it back up. Or maybe they give, you're 40 days behind, you've slipped 40 days, over a period, and they give you one contract adjustment that gives you 15 of those days where you got a contract extension for one of the delays, but you've been slipping a lot more. So this, comparing these two shows me, where I fell behind. And this one shows me where I got contract time extensions. Usually those don't match up. Usually I fall behind because of a delay and it takes months for my contract to get adjusted. You know what I mean? So it's looking at both, but those are two very separate things that, to show as far as keeping you, as far as keeping you in the loop on what's going on. Right, because I could be finishing behind and way behind on my, I may have a delay way back here and I'm way behind on my contract time and it would show it here, but now I'm maintaining, but I'm way behind on my contract time until I get that time extension, right? And so those are two things that you track separately. All right.
Any other questions? Thanks, John, for the explanation. And thanks, Tony. Thanks, Angela, for the questions. Appreciate those. If anybody needs to have a one-on-one on those types of subjects, happy to do that with you as well. Yeah, if there's nothing else today, we'll go ahead and stop the recording and I will yes.